Hello everyone. I will discuss on Amnesty International origin, principle and activities. I have already shared one PDF on the campaign methods of Amnesty International. So here some of the principle and activities I will focus in. So we see that Amnesty International is an independent worldwide movement. It works solely for the protection of certain fundamental rights. It doesn't support or oppose any government or political party. Its activities focus strictly on prisoners. It seeks to release of prisoners of conscience. These are people detained anywhere for their belief, color, sex, ethnic origin, language, or religion who haven't used or advocated violence. It works for fair or prompt trial for all political prisoners. It opposes the death penalty and torture of other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment of all prisoners without reservation. In carrying out this mandate, Amnesty International doesn't support or oppose the views of the prisoners whose right it seeks to defend. It addresses the human rights involved in its case, regardless of the ideology of the government or the beliefs of the victims. Regarding the origin of Amnesty International, the organization Amnesty International began in 1961 with a newspaper article by British lawyer Peter Benenson. He asked people everywhere to begin working impartially and peacefully for the protection of human rights. Within a month, more than 1,000 people from various countries had sent in offers of principle sent in offers of some practical help, and it attaches great importance to impartial and accurate reporting of facts. Its activities depends on meticulous research into allegations of human rights violation. Its international secretariat in London has a research department which collects and analyzes information from a wide variety of sources. It publishes a monthly newsletter featuring individual cases in need of mass international action. In some countries, one can join a local group or other type of action network. To protect impartiality, groups and members are not asked to act on cases in their own countries. Regarding the membership of funding, Amnesty International has an active worldwide membership. There are more than 7 lakhs members and subscribers in all over 150 countries and territories. It is impartial. It doesn't support or oppose any governments or political system. It relies on donations from its members and supporters. Its financial independence is as vital to its work as its political independence. Rules about accepting contributions are strict in order to ensure that no funds received affect its integrity, make it dependent on any door, or limit its freedom of activity. Regarding decisions on cases, all cases are assessed strictly in the light of Amnesty International's mandate and the reliability of the information received. Each case is decided on its own individual merits, and the international organization always carefully considers the most effective way of aiding the victim concerned. It always makes its own assessment of the facts. For example, in deciding whether a person should be considered a prisoner of conscience, it is not bound to accept the assertion of the government, the interpretation of a court, or the claim of the prisoners as to whether or not he or she has advocated violence. So, if the prisoner has been convicted of a violent criminal offense or has been accused of belonging to an organization which advocated violence, This doesn't necessarily prevent them from being considered a prisoner of conscience. So, in allocating these cases to groups, safeguards have been adopted to ensure overall impartiality. So, we see that local Amnesty International groups are not allocated cases of prisoners held in their own countries, nor do they collect or issue information on their own countries. Its group is allocated cases with contrasting geographical and political backgrounds. Groups are not asked to work on cases in countries which are in conflict with their own when this could in any way jeopardize the prisoner in question or give the impression that Amnesty International is itself politically biased. Regarding dealing with opposition groups and governments, Amnesty International, as a matter of principles, condemns the torture and execution of prisoners by anyone, including opposition groups. It holds that responsibility for dealing with such abuses rests with governments acting in conformity with international standards for the protection of human rights. In its approaches to governments, Amnesty International respects certain standards. It informs the authorities of missions sent to their countries, seeks meeting with their representatives, and submits the reports of those missions for comments to the government before publication. Regarding principles, independence and impartiality are fundamental principles in the work of Amnesty International. They affect all the movement's worldwide activities, from painstaking research into individual cases to mass publicity campaigns. And these principles can be tested by looking at Amnesty International's policies and by doing its information and its working method. The problems that Amnesty International confronts are to be found in every region and under all political systems. A sobering fact that results in enormous demands being made on the organization's resources for fact finding and action. Since it was founded, Amnesty International has worked on behalf of more than 25,000 individual prisoners held at some point of time in virtually every nation in the world. Although the difficulties of collecting accurate information from some countries are formidable, its annual report regularly includes entries on more than 100 countries. Regarding collection of information, when Amnesty International hears the political arrest or people facing torture or execution, it concentrates first in getting the facts. At its international secretariat, the research department collects and analyzes information from a wide range of sources, including governments, local organizations, official and unofficial news media, and independent observers. It also sends fact-finding missions to countries to observe trial and interview government officials. No source of information is ruled out on political grounds alone. The aim is to build up a picture of human rights situation that is as thoroughly corroborated and complete as possible. It also ensures accuracy. Amnesty International makes a clear distinction between facts and allegations. The credibility of all sources of information is carefully assessed to protect the impartiality of the research. Staff do not have responsibility for decisions concerning their own country. Furthermore, to ensure the quality of information, all statements issued by it go through a series of vetting procedures, including legal scrutiny. Regarding Amnesty International's stand on human rights in different countries, we see that it works on the basis of a single universal standard, and that is the human rights proclaimed by international community through the United Nations and other bodies. Working with the most reliable information available to it, Amnesty International seeks effective ways of helping victims wherever it is aware that these rights have been violated. Techniques include long term adoption of individual cases, publicizing patterns of human rights abuses, missions to talk to government representatives, or in cases where torture or death are feared, a network of volunteers to send urgent telegrams signaling international concern. Each technique or combination of techniques is used pragmatically to get results in the best interest of the prisoners and inevitably varies from countries to country. For this region, the whole range of movements work must be taken into account when assessing its overall impartiality. Amnesty International always seeks and remains open to dialogue with governments. It doesn't grade governments according to their human rights record or trying to compare one country with another. Impartiality. Amnesty International takes no position on the question of violence. It doesn't identify itself with any of the parties to the particular conflict, violent or non-violent, nor does it presume to judge in any situation whether recourse to violence is justified or not. It deliberately restricts itself to the working for the protection of human rights that fall within its mandate and doesn't comment or act on issues that fall outside those terms of reference. So, Amnesty International has sometimes been asked to act as a mediator between government and opposition groups. It cannot do so, so it works by making clear of its opposition to specific human rights violation, publishing details about this wherever they occur, and making recommendations to the responsible authorities. So the organization doesn't negotiate either with the governments or with those in opposition. Regarding trading in terror, Amnesty International opposes transfer of military security or police equipments and training from one country to another, whether it believes that those transfers contribute to human rights abuses covered by its mandate. There are many different contexts in which such transfers take place. Amnesty International opposes the use and transfer of equipment whose sole practical purpose is the violation of human rights. Such equipments include apparatus for execution and implements of torture, as well as devices such as leg irons, shackles, and chains, which results in cruel treatment of prisoners. Amnesty International also opposes or challenges the transfer of other supplies to countries where such equipment has been misused by the security forces or armed groups to commit human rights abuses. Regarding the implements of treatment, torture, and death, Amnesty International took action against the use of leg irons, leg cuffs, fetters, and shackles several times in 1995. It campaigned against their use not only in the USA but in a number of other countries, including Pakistan and Myanmar. Governments have also failed to ban completely the design, manufactured, and trade of torture equipment. The US government revealed in 1995 that it has authorized the sale of millions of dollars of security equipment to many governments which systematically practice torture and other grave human rights violations. When the US government was asked why it had retained the category of special designed instrument of torture, which it had promised to remove from the export list a decade earlier, the US Commerce Department was only prepared to state that it was now government policy to deny applications for instruments of torture. Okay, regarding Amnesty International's work on India, uh, Amnesty International was founded in 1961 and has since worked to improve human rights protection all over the world. One of the first prisoners of conscience in India for whose release Amnesty International campaigned was Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah, the former Kashmir Prime Minister, detained almost continuously between 1953 and 1968 for peacefully advocating Kashmir's right to determine its own future. During the emergency from 1975 to 1977, Amnesty International mounted a worldwide campaign to urge the release of thousands of prisoners of conscience from all walks of life and political persuasions. They were detained without charge or trial for their views or beliefs and were even denied the remedy of habeas corpus. After that, Amnesty International visited India in January 1978 to discuss with junta government some structural measures for long-term human rights protection. It was the first and last Amnesty International delegations which visited India to have substantive discussions of its concerns with the government and to be permitted to carry out research in the country. Amnesty International published its first report on India in 1974. It analyzed and it thoroughly deliberated on the detention condition in West Bengal jails. Then Amnesty International has since published numerous reports dealing with specific aspects of its human rights concerns. These are the detention without charge or a trial of several thousands political prisoners each year, some of whom are prisoners of conscience, the systematic use of torture, dozens of disappearances, and extrajudicial executions of peaceful demonstrators and political activists in encounters with the police. It is also concerned about the continued use of death penalty. Major reports published include one on long-term detention of political suspects from Punjab and a deliberation of special laws curbing human rights, a study on the death penalty, a review of caste related to human rights violation in Bihar, and the case study of torture and extrajudicial execution perpetrated by army in Northeast India. Okay, Amnesty report on India. If we go through this, we find that the report describes a pattern of persistent abuse in the administration of justice in India. The torture, including rape, the deaths of prisoners in custody. Amnesty International has raised these concerns with successive governments in India and taken a worldwide initiative to urge that such abuses are prevalent in most of the countries and it should be prevented in future. Amnesty International regularly carries out such campaign. It has also done so, for example, on human rights violations in Brazil, China, Myanmar, Pakistan, Peru, Sri Lanka, and USA. The report criticizes practices that are unconstitutional in India itself. Numerous people in India, including judges, lawyers, writers, and civil libertarians, as well as many police and other officials, have forthrightly expressed their concern about these practices. Many have made great efforts to stop them, to demand accountability, or to provide redress. They have had success in individual cases, but the overall picture has changed little. So, the custodial violence is not an issue in India alone. Of course, such cases can be found in countries in every continent, and Amnesty International is working universally to end them. India is an open country with a vigorous press and a strong judiciary which has delivered some highly creative judgments to protect fundamental rights. Yet, even this and other Indian institutions with substantive power to safeguard the rights of India's citizens have failed to provide effective protection to the hundreds, if not thousands, of Indian citizens who have died after torture and ill treatment. The victims have been ordinary men and women, every children, some of them picked up on the flimsiest of criminal charges and have come from nearly every state during the past decade. Apart from these, we see that some people may claim that Amnesty International is interfering in the internal affairs of India. The fact is that human rights are as much a global as a national concern. India recognized this in 1979 when it became a party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. In doing so, India undertook legal obligations to the international community to observe and protect human rights. Not only did India make a universal declaration against torture, saying that it would comply with the UN Declaration Against Torture, it even initiated the 1977 resolution of UN General Assembly that introduced the declaration. Amnesty International itself is an expression of the idea that human rights are an international concern. It is an independent organization funded by voluntary contributions from our members in all over 150 countries in all regions. It doesn't accept funds from government, neither it take any position regarding aid donors, making the provision of aid conditional on human rights performance. Its act is strictly limited to the human rights field. It works for the release of prisoners of conscience who haven't used or advocated violence, for fair trial for all political prisoners, and against torture, the death penalty, extrajudicial executions, and disappearances. It relies upon and appeals to the moral power of informed public opinion. In working to protect human rights, Amnesty International primarily addresses governments because it is governments that are responsible under international law for safeguarding such right. However, we also condemn and oppose torture, deliberate and arbitrary killings, and hostage taking by armed political opposition groups, and we have repeatedly done so publicly regarding groups committing such abuses in Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir, and Assam. So, to safeguard the independence and impartiality of our work, Amnesty International members in any national section must work only on cases and campaigns in countries other than their own. The Indian section of Amnesty International has therefore has no involvement whatever in this report, and this report was compiled by the research department of Amnesty of our international secretariat. Although the Indian government in its reaction to the publication of the original version of the report in 1992 said that the report was based on merely hearsay and that it consisted of conjecture and general allegations. Details of over 400 individual cases of deaths in custody are given in the second half of this report. But after having a careful cross-checking of information in the report, and drawing on the information provided by Indian government officials and official enquiries and on report in Indian newspapers, it is realized that as far as possible on court records, sworn statement and other first-hand information from witnesses themselves, reports are true. So half of India's population are poor and illiterate, and a quarter of them are officially recognized as being in need of special protection. So people from this most vulnerable section of the population form the majority of torture victims, and members of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribal women in the northeast, migrant workers, landless laborers, many who were tortured to death were never charged with any crime. So we see other victims are people arrested for their political convictions, or people arrested in connection with the situations of armed conflict that prevailed in the northeast, Jammu and Kashmir and Punjab. In the northeast state, Jammu and Kashmir, there is a pattern of rape of women by the army and paramilitary forces for perceived support for armed insurgents. Rape and ill treatment of women by the police is widespread throughout the country. I will continue it in the next lecture, so I'll stop now. So any confusion will be discussed in the live class.